Have you ever wondered what secrets lie hidden beneath the weathered docks of America's oldest fishing ports? Well, the answer isn't just lost tackle and forgotten memories. Instead, one discovery would prove that sometimes the most extraordinary mysteries hide in the most ordinary places, waiting decades for the right person to stumble upon them. In this video, I'm going to reveal how a routine maintenance job in a small Maine fishing village led to the discovery of evidence from one of New England's most notorious unsolved heists. This case involves missing money, decades of silence, and a fisherman who accidentally became part of a story that began long before he was even born. What I'm going to do is walk you through the entire sequence of events, starting with the original crime that shook a tight-knit community, and then show you how one man's curiosity changed everything. But first, let me give you some context about why this discovery matters so much. The fishing industry has always been built on trust, handshake deals, and communities where everyone knows everyone else's business. So when something disrupts that foundation, the ripple effects can last for generations. And in 1976, something did exactly that in the small coastal town of Millfield Harbor, Maine. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear if you've ever made an unexpected discovery in your own community. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos about unsolved mysteries and remarkable discoveries. The year 1976 marked a particularly harsh winter along the Maine coast. Millfield Harbor, a working fishing village with a population of just under 3,000 residents, depended almost entirely on its lobster and groundfish industries. The community centered around its main pier, a sturdy wooden structure that extended nearly 200 feet into the protected harbor. Local fishermen had been using this pier for over a century, storing equipment, unloading catches, and conducting the business that kept their families fed. On the morning of November 15, 1976, the weekly fish truck arrived at Millfield Harbor, as it had every Tuesday for the past decade. The driver, a man named Curtis Fleming, carried with him the payment for the previous week's deliveries from local fishermen to processing plants in Portland and Boston. This wasn't unusual. Fleming had been making these runs for years, and everyone in town knew his routine. What made this particular Tuesday different was the amount of money Fleming carried. Due to an exceptionally productive fishing season and higher than normal market prices, the payment envelope contained $27,000 in cash. In 1976 dollars, this represented nearly 6 months of combined income for many of the families in Millfield Harbor. It was more money than most residents had ever seen in one place. Fleming parked his refrigerated truck near the main pier at approximately 9:30 in the morning. His routine was methodical and predictable. He would first inspect the quality of any fish waiting for transport, then distribute payments to individual fishermen based on their previous week's deliveries. The entire process typically took between 2 and 3 hours, depending on how many boats had brought in catches. The pier that morning bustled with typical activity. Fishermen prepared their boats for the day's work, checking traps, organizing lines, and discussing weather conditions. Several local residents gathered near the truck, as they did every Tuesday, to collect their payments and catch up on news from the larger towns along the coast. Fleming began his distribution process around 10 o'clock. He worked from a ledger that detailed each fisherman's deliveries, checking names against his list and counting out appropriate amounts from the envelope. Witnesses later described him as careful and thorough, taking time to verify each transaction before moving to the next person. At approximately 11:15, Fleming realized he needed to retrieve additional paperwork from his truck. He excused himself from the group gathered on the pier and walked back toward the parking area. The envelope containing the remaining undistributed money, roughly $19,000, remained on a wooden crate where Fleming had been conducting his business. What happened next would be debated and investigated for decades. When Fleming returned to the pier less than 5 minutes later, the envelope had vanished. The fishermen who had been waiting for their payments stood in the same positions, appearing as surprised as Fleming himself. No one had seen anyone approach the crate. No one had noticed anything unusual. Fleming immediately began questioning everyone present. The group consisted of 7 local fishermen, 2 dock workers, and an elderly man who often sat on the pier to watch the daily activity. Each person insisted they had been focused on their own conversations and had not observed anyone near the money. The missing envelope represented not just Fleming's responsibility to his employer, but also the livelihoods of families who depended on those payments. Several fishermen had expected to use their money for heating oil, groceries, and equipment repairs before winter set in completely. Within an hour, word of the theft had spread throughout Millfield Harbor. By noon, nearly every resident knew that someone in their community had taken money that belonged to their neighbors. The implications went far beyond the financial loss. This was a betrayal of the trust that held the small community together. Fleming contacted the local sheriff's department, and Deputy Marshal Robert Chen arrived at the scene by early afternoon. Chen had grown up in a fishing family and understood the dynamics of coastal communities. He knew that solving this case would require delicacy and patience. The initial investigation focused on the 7 fishermen who had been closest to the money when it disappeared. Each man was interviewed separately and asked to account for his movements during the crucial 5-minute window. Their stories were consistent, but Chen noticed subtle tensions between some of the men that suggested underlying conflicts. One fisherman, Daniel McGreedy, had recently fallen behind on payments for his boat repairs. Another, Thomas Carlyle, had been drinking heavily since his wife left him the previous month. A third man, Peter Donnelly, had been heard complaining about low fish prices and the difficulty of supporting his large family. Chen also interviewed the dock workers and the elderly observer. None could provide information that pointed toward a specific suspect. The elderly man, whose name was Harold Finch, mentioned seeing someone walk quickly toward the far end of the pier during the time frame in question, but he couldn't identify who it was or even confirm it was connected to the theft. As days turned into weeks, the investigation expanded beyond the immediate witnesses. Chen examined the financial situations of everyone who had been present on the pier that morning. He looked into recent purchases, debt situations, and any unusual behavior that might indicate someone had suddenly acquired a large sum of money. The results proved frustrating. None of the suspects had made significant purchases or paid off debts in ways that suggested access to the stolen funds. If someone had taken the money, they were being extremely careful about how they used it. The case began to consume the entire community. Neighbors viewed each other with suspicion. Longtime friendships became strained as people wondered who among them could have committed such a betrayal. The weekly fish truck continued to arrive, but Fleming now conducted all transactions inside the truck itself, never leaving money unattended. By spring of 1977, the investigation had reached a standstill. Deputy Marshal Chen had exhausted his leads and found no concrete evidence pointing toward any particular suspect. The case officially remained open, but active investigation ceased. What no one in Millfield Harbor knew was that the stolen money had never left their community. Instead, it remained hidden just feet away from where it had been taken, waiting patiently for someone to discover it 33 years later. That someone would be Noah Jones, a 42-year-old fisherman who had moved to Millfield Harbor only 5 years earlier, long after the original theft had faded from daily conversation. Noah Jones had arrived in Millfield Harbor in 2004, drawn by the promise of steady work and the appeal of a quiet coastal lifestyle. Unlike many of the families whose roots stretched back generations in the community, Noah was an outsider who had earned acceptance through hard work and reliability. He kept his boat in excellent condition, helped neighbors during difficult seasons, and gradually became part of the fabric of the small fishing village. By 2009, Noah had established himself as someone the community could depend on. He volunteered for maintenance projects around the harbor, assisted with seasonal dock repairs, and often stayed late to help secure boats during storms. His willingness to take on unglamorous but necessary tasks had earned him respect among both longtime residents and fellow transplants. The Maine pier that had been the center of the 1976 incident had undergone several modifications over the years. Weather damage, changing regulations, and the needs of modern fishing operations had required periodic updates to the structure. What remained constant was its central role in the community's daily operations. In early March 2009, the harbor master approached Noah about a maintenance project that had been postponed for months. The southeastern corner of the pier showed signs of structural weakness that needed immediate attention before the busy summer season began. The job required replacing several support beams and reinforcing the foundation where years of tide action had caused erosion. Noah accepted the project, understanding that the work would be both physically demanding and potentially complicated. The area requiring repair was partially submerged during high tide, which meant most of the work would need to be completed during low tide windows. The job would likely take several days of careful planning and execution. On March 18th, Noah began his assessment of the damage. He worked methodically, examining each support beam and testing the stability of the wooden planking above. The pier had been built using traditional techniques, with massive timber posts driven deep into the harbor bottom and secured with heavy crossbeams. As Noah worked beneath the pier during a particularly low tide, he noticed something unusual about one of the support structures. A section of newer wooden planking appeared to have been added sometime after the original construction. The wood showed different weathering patterns and had been attached using more modern fasteners than the rest of the structure. Curiosity prompted Noah to examine this section more closely. The newer planking formed a small enclosed space between two main support beams, creating what appeared to be an intentional hiding place. The construction was sophisticated enough to be invisible from above, but accessible to someone working underneath the pier. Noah's initial assumption was that he had discovered an old fisherman's cache, perhaps a place where someone had stored extra equipment or supplies. Such hidden compartments weren't uncommon in working harbors, where valuable gear needed protection from both weather and theft. Using a crowbar from his toolkit, Noah carefully pried away a section of the newer planking. The wood came free more easily than expected, suggesting it had been designed for periodic access rather than permanent installation. Behind the planking, Noah discovered a rectangular cavity that had been lined with waterproof material. Inside the cavity sat a large plastic container, the kind typically used for storing documents or valuable items in marine environments. The container showed signs of age, but appeared to be in good condition. It was heavy enough to suggest substantial contents, and Noah could hear objects shifting inside when he moved it. Noah's immediate thought was that he had found someone's emergency supplies or important papers. Many fishermen kept backup documents and small amounts of cash in waterproof containers, especially in the years before modern banking became more accessible in rural coastal areas. He assumed the rightful owner had either forgotten about the cache or had passed away without telling anyone about its location. The discovery presented Noah with an ethical dilemma. Opening the container would reveal its contents, but doing so might violate someone's privacy. On the other hand, if the contents were valuable or important, the rightful owner or their family might want them back. Noah decided to bring the container to the surface and examine it more thoroughly before making any decisions about opening it. He secured the container in his workboat and finished his assessment of the pier damage. The structural repairs would still be necessary, but the hidden compartment had been constructed skillfully enough that it hadn't contributed to the pier's deterioration. That evening, Noah examined the container in his workshop. It labels that might bore no identifying marks or indicate its owner. The plastic showed weathering consistent with many years of storage, but the seal appeared intact. Whatever was inside had been protected from moisture and salt air. The weight and shifting sound suggested the container held multiple items of varying sizes. Noah could distinguish what sounded like papers rustling against harder objects, possibly metal or additional containers. The combination suggested someone had stored both documents and valuable items together. After considerable deliberation, Noah decided that opening the container was justified. If the contents were valuable, the rightful owner deserved to have them returned. If they were merely old documents or worthless items, no harm would be done by examining them. Noah carefully opened the container's latches and lifted the lid. What he found inside would transform his understanding of Millfield Harbor's history and connect him to events that had occurred decades before his arrival in the community. The container held several bundles of cash, still secured with rubber bands despite their age. The bills showed the wear patterns typical of money that had been in circulation, but they were in remarkably good condition considering their apparent age. Alongside the money were documents, including what appeared to be handwritten notes and official papers. Noah's first instinct was to count the money, though he suspected doing so would only complicate the situation further. The bills were predominantly 20s, 50s, and 100s, denominations that suggested serious financial transactions rather than casual savings. As he examined the documents more carefully, Noah began to understand that he had discovered something far more significant than someone's forgotten emergency fund. The papers included references to dates, names, and locations that suggested a connection to something important in the community's past. One document in particular caught his attention. It was a handwritten note that mentioned the Pier, specific dates from 1976, and what appeared to be instructions for accessing the hidden compartment where Noah had found the container. The discovery that began with routine pier maintenance had revealed one of Millfield Harbor's longest-kept secrets. Noah's find beneath those weathered planks connected him to a mystery that had torn through the community decades before his arrival, proving that some stories refused to stay buried. Sometimes the most extraordinary revelations hide in the most ordinary places, waiting patiently for the right person to uncover them. What other secrets might be waiting beneath the docks and piers of America's coastal towns?